My guest this week is Sean Nelson. All right, check this out, everybody. Sean Nelson is a writer, musician, and actor, probably best known as a lead singer-songwriter for Seattle indie pop band Harvey Danger. He also recorded and performed with Robin Hitchcock, Death Cab for Cutie, The Decemberists, and Not a Surf. And his debut solo album, Make Good Choices, was released in 2013. He's appeared on the CBS's Late Show with David Letterman, The Late Late Show, and his music has been featured in many films and TV shows, including the recent Netflix hits Do Revenge and The Midnight Club, as well as being featured in Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, American Pie, Dude, Where's My Car, The Voice, Californication, and best of all, as the theme song for 8 seasons of the BAFTA award-winning British sitcom Peep Show. Nelson's modest acting career began with the lead role in the late Lynn Shelton's second feature, My Effortless Brilliance, and in 2011, he wrote and co-directed Treatment, co-starring future Oscar winner Brie Larson, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. And for 25 years, Nelson has also worked as a journalist, primarily for The Stranger, but he's also been published by Pitchfork, the Los Angeles Times, Entertainment Weekly, and his book about Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark was published by Continuum's Books, 33 1/3 series, all while he was an on-air host at KEXP for 18 years. His most recent music release is Nelson Sings Nilsson, an album of songs by the late, great Harry Nilsson, arranged for a 27-piece rock band orchestra. But his next project is The Wonder of It All, an interview-based podcast exploring the blessings and curses of success, which will be produced by Nebula. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Sean Nelson. Hi, Sean.
Hi, it gives me great pleasure to be here.
Oh, and I love your Valley Girl shirt.
Thank you. Yes.
I remember when that film came out, I was kind of angry because I was like, that's not what punk rock's like.
Right.
You know, and then it was like, you watch it later and you're like, it's fine. Like, he's kind of, you know, what was my deal?
It's definitely not what punk rock was like, but I was 10 when it came out and living pretty close to the Valley. I grew up in the Valley, and I was living kind of up in the north, just northwest of LA in Ventura County. And I do remember around the time that a little before the movie came out, but not too much before, but after the song Valley Girl, all of the girls in my elementary school, like as one on one day, all started talking like that. Like they just arrived talking that way. It was amazing.
That's so intense because on the Patreon podcast I have about Erg, Music War,
yeah,
Chalky, who grew up in LA, my co-host, said that when Belinda and that first Go-Go's record came out, that people started saying words like she said on that record.
I bet.
And he said it just was so, it's fascinating that like LA has this like language culture, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think everybody there is always looking for an idea they can, you know, get behind and have their life organized by. And that was a big one. I mean, obviously Moon Unit, Zappa knew something was going on well before any of that.
Absolutely. Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of LA and legends,
indeed,
and language and mythology, you picked one that I think a lot of people have been waiting for, The Doors by Oliver Stone,
yes,
1991 film. Did you see this in the theater when it came out?
I not only saw it in the theater when it came out, I was like dying to see it. That was my senior year of high school. And the trailers had been out and they had re-released Break On Through as a single with footage from the movie and the video. And I didn't see the video a lot, but like the trailer was so big among the people in my graduating class. Like we just were so excited. And in 1991, I mean, I cannot claim any sort of cultural savviness of that from that time. I was 17.
Right.
And I was so late to any sort of kind of whatever savviness that like, to me, the Doors were just like, you know, perfectly cool, really amazing. Like I had no critical sense of the Doors or Jim Morrison or Oliver Stone for that matter. I just thought, holy shit, this is coming and it looks so amazing. And I didn't know anything about being in a band or anything like that. It just seemed like it was tailor made. And I think it's funny because that moment, obviously 1991 is a big year in a lot of ways.
I know, it's amazing that it's 1991 in a way. It's like out of step.
Totally out of step. Like 3 months later, it was completely obliterated. This whole idea, or maybe four, whatever. But like in the regular world where I lived, and certainly in Northern Virginia where I was in high school, there was no sense of like. I mean, there was actually, of course, a huge sense of it in, DC and Virginia was like real indie and punk kind of, mainstay
Sure.
around there. But I didn't know about that. Like, I knew the word Fugazi because I had heard of it, and I knew that it was something, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't I'd never heard them.
Sure.
I didn't know any of that stuff. So, but yeah, for them, like my, 7 or 8 kind of good friends and I were just so incredibly excited. And I don't actually know I'm curious what the release date was. I know it was 91. I can't remember if it was just after I graduated or just before, but like I for sure went to the first available screening of it.
Wow. Like opening
Whenever
weekend.
that was. Like waiting in line to get in, although I
Yeah.
don't remember a particularly long one.
It came out in March of 91,
Okay.
March 1st.
Yeah. So we were all going crazy about it in high school.
The Doors were, I feel like it's a young person's music. Like my parents had those records. And I remember at one point taking my youngest brother, Isaac, and being like, he was 12 or 13, and being like, you got to go into the room in the dark and listen to Strange Days and don't come out till you're done. And I did this to him. And, now he's a record store owner, right? And a reissue label guy. But it was so, in a way, it was like the most dangerous thing I had at a certain age, right? It was compared to the things that were slotted in some record collections. And I think that you start getting into the myth and the language and the what you could piece together,
right?
Because it was also really hard at that point to get much access visually to what the Doors were about,
right? Except in photographs. I mean, the photograph, like, let's just establish that Jim Morrison, the main thing about him maybe is that he was like one of the best looking men who ever
absolutely
drew breath. Like he's perfect looking, and that like then as now it goes a really long way. In the world, certainly in the world of pop and rock music, it never hurts to be incredibly beautiful. Or so I have read.
Do you remember what you felt seeing the film in the theater? Like, I remember my feelings, but what do you remember?
I do remember that I was completely on board. Like I was enraptured by it. I thought it was like breathtaking, thrilling, and Oliver Stone was also he had also not yet been kind of subject to revision in the kind of cultural imagination. He was just like during the shooting of the Doors movie, he won the Best Director Oscar for Born on the 4th of July, and he had done obviously he had done a few really big movies in a row. Platoon was one of the biggest movies.
Yeah, Wall Street and talk radio and Salvador.
Yeah, Born on the 4th of July, of course. Salvador was really good.
Yeah, and so he was in the conversation as a great American filmmaker who is going to be like Scorsese or Coppola. And after this, he did JFK and Natural Born Killers, and then you start getting into more of the I've never heard of this film kind of territory.
Right. But he also those movies, like after Born on the 4th of July, which was in its way, I mean, it was really good, I think, in a lot of ways. But it was the Doors movie, and then of course JFK, and then Natural Born Killers in a big way, where he really started getting ambitious about the style that he used. And for the Doors movie, it was incredibly captivating. There's all that time lapse photography, and there's a lot of special kind of process shots of the sky and things like that I guess ILM did with him or for him or whatever. I mean, it just made it seem so. It just seemed thrilling, and because I was a teenager at a particular point in my life, I was really like ripe to be captivated, and I knew the Doors music from when I was a kid. I remember when MTV they put out a posthumous live album in the 80s called Alive She Cried, and I saw randomly like maybe it was on MTV's Closet Classics or something, but I saw they had a video of a live performance of Love Me Two Times, and I thought, wow, what does that mean? I wonder. But I really liked it, and I got that album for Christmas, I think. But I spent a lot of time listening to the Doors as a kid, like a child, and I always really liked it, but I didn't go any further than that. And as I got to be a teenager, kind of ready to be sort of, ready to have some captivating experiences with, cultural figures from the past or whatever, I was all over it. I loved it.
That's amazing. Because, these were my parents' records.
Yeah.
And, and they didn't have all of them. They just had like the first two. So there was a big gap for me. I didn't know any of the later period, what is it, American Prayer?
Yeah.
And things like that,
I'd
never heard the Soft Parade. So
right.
For me, I had these like two hot out of the gate albums. And it's so weird because Oliver Stone, he heard the Doors while he was in Vietnam, and he actually, his first script that he wrote was called Break, and it was based on the writings of Jim Morrison. He was obsessed with, the Doors and Jim Morrison, and what they did in terms of music and drug culture and Danger. But it's so interesting because, you get some bands are only going to get one chance to have this story told. I don't think we're going to see another Doors biopic in our lifetime.
I don't think there'll be a competing version. No.
Right. And, the DePalma wanted to do one, Scorsese, Friedkin.
Yeah. At one point, it was going to be DePalma and John Travolta as Morrison.
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, the people that were up for it before Val Kilmer were like Tom Cruise, Bono, Ian Astbury from The Cult, Johnny Depp. And Stone and Kilmer, it's like perfect for the type of energy. I mean, this is Ray Manzarek said it best. He said that, basically, this is not Jim Morrison. It's Oliver Stone in leather pants. And the film is Oliver Stone wanting to live through Jim Morrison. And, Ray Manzarek was pissed. He didn't want to be involved. Yeah. Robbie Krieger, the guitar player, and John Densmore, the drummer, were involved. So it really fractured the band in terms of like, while they were starting to kind of still own their legacy a bit, with reissues and concert films. So I think that even though I have problems with the film, because I remember seeing it as like in my 20s and being like, wow, look at the wigs. Yeah. Okay. Is that Meg Ryan? Why is she wearing granny clothes? Like, I was really taken out of it because I think at this point I'd already seen, better films and better biopics. Sure. And I realized that some of the dialogue was hacky. But at the same time, watching this film again, you're like, it's a complete love letter and it's a total tour de force. I think it's the most Oliver Stone film he made.
I agree. Somewhere between that one and maybe Natural Born Killers, there's a certain it's unconstrained by reason,
right?
And the Doors. Well, so when you saw the movie, were you already into music? Were you already playing music or anything like that?
Yeah. So let's see. In '91, I was on Sub Pop.
Oh, right.
So, right.
Of course.
So for me,
Sprinkler days.
Yeah. So for me, it was like I was starting to find the things that, like it's so funny. Like Iggy Pop loves the Doors, and you can see if you watch like concert footage of Jim Morrison telling the audience they're a bunch of fucking idiots and moving on stage and rolling around, it's like, I get it. I get the line, because I just had outgrown it. I think that at this point, I was looking at other areas, I'd just seen Mudhoney, and so you discover the MC5 and seen the Butthole Surfers. And so there was Danger in real time at this point.
Yeah.
But as a child who had the records and could look at Strange Days, the album cover, and kind of listen to Horse Latitudes,
yes,
it's like that was theater of the mind for a child and a young teenager. Yeah. And so it was powerful. But I think I just at that point was kind of like, this is a different era. This is the hippie era. What comes with it is Oliver Stone's. You get the love, but you also get the ham-fistedness, and you get a lot of conflict in terms of what are you really trying to say with this film in terms of art and success and drug culture and music and the war. It's kind of a mess that way. So I just remember just kind of being like, I thought it was fun, but I also thought it was pretty corny,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what emerges when you look at it now. It's sort of like, wow, this is like, I don't like using the word pretentious because I think it's sort of it's a catch-all word that people use when they mean like he thinks he's smart or whatever. But portentous certainly, and like this kind of like there's just no, I guess. So the Doors obviously are a really divisive band. People who are into music really despise them or really love them.
On the fifth line of my notes, the Doors are a divisive band. People either love them or hate them. Where do you? I mean, it's just like it's so true. People hate the Doors.
They really do. And of course, I had no idea of that then. I knew my dad hated the Doors, but he was like into folk rock and hanging out on the Sunset Strip at the time they were getting big. And he was turned off by their darkness or whatever. And he thought it was really funny. He's like, I call them the Boers, like that sort of thing. And so for me, there was like a tiny little element of, I guess, rebellion or something in liking them. But, I started listening to them in the mid 80s when there was no like cultural pushback about the Doors. It was just like they had all these hits and the singer wore leather pants and it was, they were dark.
Well, and sonically, no one sounds like them.
No one.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't hear bands that I'm like, oh, wow, they got a real Doors edge to them.
Right.
It's like their language in terms of four people who are playing kind of against each other. Like they're all soloing. Right. They're all soloing. But they do it really well in a way that, like, when people talk about the Grateful Dead, and I haven't really been able to crack that, and I try time and time again.
Yeah, that's hard.
I feel like they sound like they're not listening.
Right.
And the Doors, if Jim's going to go off and do something, if Morrison was going to do something and go on a spiel, like they had a really amazing telepathy in terms of how to stop on a dime, when to like bring it back, when to like have everything grow. And it's basically Robbie Krieger's soloing the whole time.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's really kind of, I get why I love it,
Yeah.
But I also I think it's Morrison that people dislike more than anything.
Well,
the idea of him.
He's a ridiculous figure in so many ways. And yet, like, I'm sure you have known or seen people, and I have for sure seen people who are, like just incredibly good looking who join a band and they like the band maybe gets pretty popular as a result of them having somebody who people like to go and stand in front of. Yes. And they do preposterous things. And his whole thing about poetry and like his poetry it's bad. It's like, it's very, very bad poetry. It's not even poetry.
There's that scene early in the film where Ray Manzarek is being played by Kyle MacLachlan, which is
Brilliantly.
amazing. Yeah, it's so him. He's
so
just
good.
he's meditating on the beach. He sees Jim, and he's like, "Yeah, you write." And he's like, "Yeah, well, sing me a song if you want to be a singer. Sing me a song." And he does, let's swim to the moon, let's climb through the tide, penetrate the evening that the city subside. And he does like a verse.
Yeah.
And Kyle MacLachlan goes, "Those are great fucking lyrics, man. You wrote this?" Like, which happens in every film like this where, and you're like, wow, like these lyrics are the worst.
Yeah. I really like the song Moonlight Drive. I
love it too.
Always liked it. And they're not, I wouldn't want them on my tombstone, but like they're perfectly serviceable rock and roll lyrics. He has way worse ones for sure.
Right.
But it is that moment where he's like, it's Val Kilmer on his knees in leather pants on the beach, and Ray Manzarek or Kyle MacLachlan literally sitting there going Om, and then they're talking about he's talking about they both dropped out of UCLA film school, and to me the thing about it it's not like he just says, "Oh wow, those are some great fucking lyrics, man." He goes, "Those are some great fucking lyrics, man." Like his conviction is so intense, and that to me typifies what the movie is, which is like it's like what Jim Morrison thought the Doors were, or like what the most intense 13-year-old fan of the Doors in 1969 or 8 would have told you the Doors were about. And then he commits all his resources to acting as though that were absolutely the truth and not like just someone's opinion or whatever. Like he makes no effort to kind of step back and be like, oh, he's setting his house on fire with his wife trapped in the closet to punish her for doing exactly what he does. Like the all sorts of moments like that where the movie says Jim is not only a great rock and roll singer, but like a poet warrior on the order of like something from Greek myth, and never more explicitly than when he's getting his photo taken, the famous photo of his arms out and the little necklace, and the photographer who is played by Mimi Rogers, trying to seduce him to the camera, and she's like, "Jim Morrison, the god of rock and cock," and he looks into the mirror and it dissolves to a bust of like Bacchus or Dionysus, whatever, like a literal statue. That's what he sees when he looks at himself, and the movie does nothing to say this guy's a little fucking crazy or like he's a little full of himself. But what the movie is saying is that that's what he is, that's what he was, and that's the story of the Doors. And that's why the movie is so good.
Yeah, and it's also like it allows him to be just a prick.
Yeah,
Just terrible. It's like the film. There's very little time where you're on, I feel like, Jim Morrison's side, but Oliver Stone is like totally on his side the whole time.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter, like whether he's setting the house on fire, he has a reason, right? Whether he's gonna stomp on a duck at a dinner party,
right,
and fight with Pam. It's like Morrison was the one who's right. We'll laugh about it later,
right? And he's super unpleasant. And I mean, and also like the shows, the many Doors shows where he will start singing and then stop and then start haranguing the audience that you're all a bunch of fucking slaves, he says all the time.
Right.
And at first the guys in the band are like, ooh, what's he gonna do next? And trying to play along. And then eventually they're like, Jesus fucking Christ, is he doing it again?
Yeah.
But the movie is like, look at these assholes. They wouldn't even support him when he was doing his most important work,
Right. Oh, it's classic story beats, in this. And, you've seen it and all. I mean, I saw it it's in the Weird Al movie, that came out. He totally breaks down this thing with the band and him going off and just, so you want to see it and the whole thing. It's like, it's classic, but it's so corny. The other thing that's really interesting is I think Oliver Stone considered himself like the ultimate rock and roll rock star filmmaker. Okay. Oliver Stone was such a big personality, and it was an Oliver Stone movie, right? And very few filmmakers get that tag, Tarantino, right, Scorsese. And the fact that Oliver Stone was full on in this conversation and treated as a legendary filmmaker is really interesting when you go back and look at the holes in a lot of his work.
Well, yeah.
I don't know if it was just time and place. It was kind of right before the great 90s indie filmmaking boom happened.
Yeah.
Having the video store when I opened it in 96, it was just a plethora of amazing indie filmmakers. You go to the theater, like a little theater, and every week you'd see something amazing, by some director you'd never heard of. And Oliver Stone is still a product of big budget studio thing, but he's also provocative and he takes chances. And it's not a lazy film, even though some of his thoughts about the Doors are lazy.
It's intellectually lazy.
Yes.
Intellectually lazy, but not in terms of craft. The craft is impeccable. That's part of the reason why I remain attracted to the movie. I've had every version of the conversation you can have about this movie, because I would say that I have a soft spot for it because of how much I loved it when it first came out, and just kind of it's like being compassionate to your inner child or something.
I get that.
You bring up the Doors in the world of contemporary rock and roll anytime in the last 20 years. And it's 9 out of 10 people will be like, the fucking Doors, they fucking suck. And also that movie is a piece of shit. And I can't argue. I can't deny that. I mean, what they say isn't wrong exactly, but there's still I wouldn't say the Doors suck, but I get why people don't like them. And I people I respect just totally reject them. And then every once in a while, it's just, it's not like the Eagles, where it's clearly a response to the music, but also the people, there's a sense of I just wouldn't, the idea of being trapped in an elevator with Don Henley or Glenn Frey or whatever, especially now I get Glenn Frey. It's just the worst idea you could imagine. But with the Doors, it's that thing of so we're gonna sit here and you're gonna tell me about jazz for 2 hours, it's that sort of thing. But I do think there's a fundamental sort of a slight broken circuit in Oliver Stone's kind of reading of the Doors, and you see it a bunch of times in the movie, particularly in the film school bit, but then later too, where the people will be talking about Godard, or I got to see the head of the studio, and he was like, "Where's your script?" And I was like, "I don't need a script. Godard doesn't use a script." And he's like, "Yeah, right. Who's Godard?" And the idea there is the people who run Hollywood don't know anything about art, and it's all bullshit. But then 1 second later, he is saying what you just said, let's go make $1 million, and every time somebody talks about them having an opportunity, it's always you listen to this guy, you can get rich, and that's the backstage hippie played by Eric Burden of the Animals.
Yeah, for 2 seconds. It's so weird. I was like, wait.
I know, it's crazy.
What's Eric Burden? The cameos are weird. There's you mentioned Mimi Rogers. Paul Williams is in it as Andy Warhol's PR person. Crispin Glover as Warhol.
Crispin Glover as Andy Warhol is a great performance, by the way.
And also you get John Densmore playing the engineer during the later period of Jim Morrison's life. And then their producer, Paul A. Rothschild, plays a music manager's sidekick.
Right.
So and even Oliver Stone plays the film instructor, right? Who tells Jim Morrison he's pretentious, right?
Right. And he does that's his Martin Scorsese impersonation, kind of.
Yeah, it's really weird. The other thing that's really amazing is they'll have a character like Jack Holzman from Elektra just show up and be like, you kids got it. Stick with me.
Right.
If we can put down what you have on stage, we really have something that will make a lot of money. Jack Holzman said he went 3 or 4 times to see the Doors because the band Love were like, hey, you should check out this band that's playing with us a lot. And Love were like the big hope in LA. They were the better band, right? They had just, I mean, it's undeniable, when you listen to, Forever Changes, it eclipses anything that came out during that time.
Yeah.
But the fact that Jack Holzman just had to be convinced, he was like, I don't see it.
Right.
I think that's a much more interesting story. It's like to have somebody be like, I don't get you guys, and then like after a while it clicks, because a lot of my favorite things I didn't get on first listen or first viewing. And then later I'm like, what was my problem? I love this thing. I get it. And, but it's something that like is just not part of Oliver Stone's love for the Doors. He has to bend it to his will.
I feel like the disconnect is between the kind of vaunted ideas of art and like there'll be loving sort of, shots that sort of pan over stacks of books. And it's like Artaud and Rimbaud and, Jack Kerouac and all this stuff. You never really engage with any of those ideas, obviously, because it's just a movie. But like and just the idea of that writing poetry itself is noble or whatever. And there's some hilarious dialogue as well along those lines. Like in the film school, they're arguing over Jim's super pretentious student film. And he's like, man, you need your art spoon-fed to you. And he's like, no, man, it's non-linear. It's everything good art stands for. It's like kids pretending to be, pretentious college students. It's like a farce almost. But I think the disconnect is between Oliver Stone's idea of what art ought to be and how it's so important and so vaunted. And then obviously like like he's making a probably $60 million movie or what, you know what I mean? Like like he only works at the top level and he wouldn't get out of bed for less than his normal fee at that point. And then, but then at the same time, he can criticize the guys in the Doors for like the guys being willing to change their lyrics to lyrics to Light My Fire to play on Sullivan. And you're like, the movie is definitely saying Jim Morrison found himself surrounded by sellout, traitors in his band. And he was the only one with any courage. And like, maybe that's kind of true to some extent, but at the same time, the idea of like the head of MGM giving a shit who Godard is in 1968 or whatever, like 66, 7, like, Godard was making really amazing work right then, but it's not like it would make a lot of money if made in a studio, like it's just two different whole sort of strands of culture. And sometimes they come together, and the Doors are in a funny way where it comes together, because what's interesting about them is not the 20-minute poem in the middle of the live song. It's Light My Fire, like they had huge hits and nobody would be talking about them if they didn't.
Well, I wanted to talk about the casting choices in this film.
Yeah.
I think Val Kilmer does a great Morrison, especially with the lines he's been given. He had to convince them that he was right for the part, and he auditioned and made a little tape. But also he does that thing where he went method, didn't want anyone talking to him unless they had a reason, had to call him Jim on the set. Frank Whaley, who plays Robbie Krieger, just only referred to him as the asshole because he was just like, I'm not going to do that. There's a really amazing, like, behind the scenes making of, probably for some DVD extra thing or some reissue. And they're so frank about this film. Like, Oliver is like going off on like Meg Ryan, saying like she's just constipated in the film and like she was totally wrong. And I'd forgotten that Meg Ryan played, Pamela in this film.
Yeah.
Till I rewatched it lately. I was like,
I would argue she's miscast, but
oh, absolutely.
Also, she was such a big star. Like, I don't know why she would want to play Pam, but but I get why anyone would put her in the movie. It's the classic thing.
It's an Oliver Stone film, so there's probably excitement for that. But yeah, the film is super sexist, and the
Yeah.
female roles are just really so just servitude to Jim, whether it's through the occult and like a blood wedding and his impotence, and then like getting him so mad that he becomes a great lover, and we get to see Jim Morrison have a slow motion orgasm, and
Right.
it's just like it's so. Yeah, it's so Oliver Stone. It's just like he has such a childish way about him sometimes, like such a male child way of making films.
I think that the sort of, that element of the kind of, I don't know, political or, like its gender politics are very firmly fixed in like 1967, 68 kind of vibe. And, there are few enough women in the movie who don't just sort of out of nowhere take their shirts off or like there's so much like it's truly gratuitous. But I think in the idea of the movie, it's like, what's wrong with that? Like, what's wrong with sexuality and freedom and all? Like, it's a funny kind of, it's that kind of classic self-justification for doing stuff that's like, obviously that like nudity in a movie like this is good for business. It's also probably fairly accurate if the film that I've seen of the 60s, late 60s is to be believed. But it is also like there are no interesting woman characters. And the one who is maybe who comes closest, who was played by Kathleen Quinlan, the Patricia Keneally. Yeah, she was a journalist, but also this pagan Wiccan like witch who, and she's the real woman is in the film performing the wedding ceremony.
I know, that's incredible,
amazing.
I thought that was great.
And she's interesting not because she is like into drinking blood or whatever, though that's I guess mildly interesting. It's that she is the journalist at the press conference at the beginning of that, or the press conference is where we meet her, and that scene is really interesting for one other important reason. But she's the one who like busts Jim on the lies he tells about his parents being dead, and his response is basically just to be like, God, you shouldn't have done that, and then like but that's it. Like there's no reckoning, there's no never gets real about it. It's just then the cop comes in and maces him. But that press conference is especially interesting because it's like to me one of the big like how you learn that you were wrong about the door, or how you learn to be critical about the Doors. One of the most important facets of that experience is reading the Joan Didion piece about being in the studio with them, and it's just like an absolute master class in so many different ways, like the writing, the reporting, but also just like the tone, because she never says these guys are a bunch of fucking idiots, but that's really what the story is,
Yes.
Like rock stars are not people that you should be especially looking up to. Like they might have musical talent, but they are not interesting or smart. But there is in that press conference scene a woman character who is clearly meant to stand in for Joan Didion. Not that she looks like Joan Didion or anything, but she's kind of an older woman dressed a little too kind of young and sexy for her age, I think is what is being communicated by her clothes. And she just keeps asking these really disdainful questions like, what do you make of the terrible reviews that your latest collection of poetry has garnered, like really, really condescending. And at every turn, Jim's answers to her questions make her like, oh God, he got me again. Like that, like he has to win. There's no room in the film for somebody being like, I mean, yeah, these guys are fucking 22 years old. Like, of course they're not that smart, But for the movie to work, they have to be not only smart but absolutely holy. You know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much. There's a lot of it where, like, yeah, they are always ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
In terms of the culture, where it's going, what people should be talking about, what they should be worried about. But then at the same time, he's just some knucklehead who will just get up on top of a van and say, "I'm the Lizard King,"
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, you forget, like, these were kids. You know,
They're
Jim
kids.
Morrison was dead by 27, you know? So, you
Yeah.
know, when the first stuff came out, he's 21, 22. And yeah, to have to be kind of the spokesperson, you know, especially because he, you know, also leaned into his own myth. Morrison did.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think he was somebody who ever said, like, well, you know, I'm just a writer, you know, you don't have to just take it for what it is. I think he really was like, I am special.
Right. And I mean, the god, or the, you know, the mythical figure he should have identified with was Narcissus, not Bacchus,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But you know, so like on the gender politics front or whatever, the you know, when he meets Pam, he doesn't meet her, he sees her on the beach and then like stalks her, follows her home, climbs up onto her deck, and she's like, "Who are you?" Instead of like, "Oh my God, who the fuck are you?" You know?
Yeah, he enters her room later.
Yeah.
And just like in the dark, is like, "Come with me."
Yeah. And she goes happily, and the movie says damn straight. That again is the thing of like what he does with her, how he meets her like that, is in the movie romantic, like poetic, amazing. She says, why did you follow me? And he says, because you're the one. And instead of like blowing a rape whistle or like calling the cops or whatever, she kisses him back and loves it, and it's great. And you know, I'm not saying that could never be true. I'm just saying that like in most cases that's uncomfortable. Like watching it now, it really is like, oh my God. But when I was 17, I was like, oh my God, that's the most romantic thing. That's how it ought to be.
You know, we just did Purple Rain not long ago, and the same thing.
Oh my God, yeah.
I saw it with my friends. You know, I went with all my female friends, and they loved Prince, and they did not have a problem with that film at all.
Yeah.
They, you know, I mean,
it really,
they were like, "It was romantic and it's funny," and you watch it now, and you're like, "Oh wow, like this is
the dumpster
nuts."
scene is hard to defend.
Yeah. It's just so I just think again, it's just kind of where big filmmaking was at in terms of storytelling, and also it's really funny. Like, you know, you talk about all the nudity in the film. Val Kilmer is holding on to that towel around his waist for dear life when he's.
We never see his penis.
No, there's no full frontal Val action, and then it is a butt double.
Yeah.
For everything else, and I'm like, your method, dude.
Right.
Like you're having people call you, and it's so funny. I talked to a friend of mine who's an actor, and he said to me, he said, people who do method acting, it's just they don't know how to act. He's like, that's just a crutch. He's like, if you're a good actor, you don't have to live in the character the whole time. But you just don't have to.
Even if you do that's not what the method even is, but that's a whole other conversation. But this idea that you have to be the person on screen and off is really just like, in some ways it's what it's embodying is more of the sort of in the tank with Morrison's narcissism and like self mythologizing, because it seems perfect. And in some ways, like I could imagine, I don't have to imagine. I've seen plenty of people who go around pretending they're Jim Morrison anyway, even with a different name. But I don't especially object to nudity in films or anything like that. It's always just interesting the way the movie itself justifies it or doesn't. Like there is a shot at one of the kind of it's maybe like middle period of the film, but it's when things are getting darker and darker for the Doors, and they're playing in front of, I don't know what this show was, but it's like a giant arena, but there's a massive bonfire in the middle of it, and he's singing one of his weird improvisational rants, and there's a shot of a woman who just like faces the camera as if, you know, obviously sort of from Jim's POV, but not really. And she just ever so gradually lowers her like, deerskin top until she's just naked. Like it's not for the movie, it's for the camera, like, or it's for the director or something. And it's sort of like maybe it can be interpreted as like this is how women what it's I think what the movie is saying is that this is how women like were like they had to respond to Jim's sexual being and the amazing incantatory powers of his music by doing like she had no she was compelled to do it. And
Right.
it's just like it's such a cheat, that's the bummer of it.
Well, it's also amazing, like the way they put the weight on his trip to New York.
I really want to get into that.
Basically, they play Ed Sullivan, and God bless all the Ed Sullivan uh, imitators who can get work in these
Yeah.
films. Long may they reign. But, they go to a after party, basically, where you see Nico and Crispin Glover as Andy Warhol and Paul Williams walking around. And, it's there's films being projected, and there's a lot of, oh, there's death in the corner, like all this,
Right.
there's all this like stuff going on. But the band is basically like, these people are vampires. We
Yeah.
got to get out of here, Jim. And Jim's like, stay.
We got a big show tomorrow.
And he's like, stay, man. This is where, this is it. We're
Right.
here. Again, it's another thing where it's like these guys were not hip enough to hang
Right.
with this New York crowd. These guys were squares. Jim stayed. Jim continued living dangerously.
For sure. The factory sequence is really a both. It's exactly both a high and low point of the movie. Style wise, it is insanely accomplished, insanely ambitious. At one point, as you realize how high everybody is and how drunk, you notice that the camera is actually sort of rocking back and forth like a ship in the ocean. Like it's amazing. It's audacious. It's so well executed. And what it is portraying is like a bigger lie than any other lie in the whole movie. Like his version of Andy Warhol is hilarious, and Crispin Glover is brilliant playing this sort of like it's actually in some ways closer to like my favorite idea of Andy Warhol is this just sort of like really he's so queeny, not in any sort of, he's not hiding it or masking it in any way. He's basically like he sees Jim Morrison and starts licking his lips with desire. And that's, amazing in its own way. But I think clearly I think Stone is saying these people might think they're making art, but obviously the real art is elsewhere. Meanwhile, you're hearing Venus in Furs and Heroin by the Velvet Underground, two songs that basically dwarf everything the Doors ever did. You know what I mean? Like it's like it's so captivating. Suddenly you're like, oh wow, this is music I have no trouble defending, my own
Right.
love of. But I mean, and also not for nothing, but the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, they hated the Doors, with all of what they and they were not incorrect to hate that. Like their reasoning or whatever, their argument was just, the idea that they were supposed to have some sort of common cause or that this was dark, like compared to either of those two Velvet Underground songs, the Doors music is not dark. It's like a pastiche of darkness. However, the real crime is the way he portrays Nico. First of all, as this like crypto Italian, like hot-blooded slut, like all she wants to do is like she literally like she's another one who sort of strips down for no reason, gets on her knees and starts blowing Jim Morrison in an elevator a few minutes after they meet. And like I'm not saying that Nico wouldn't have maybe done that in real life. I have no idea. But like the idea that she is this sort of lusty body, like fun-loving kind of gal, whatever. It's so the opposite of what she has been portrayed to be by everyone who has ever written a word about her. But
Yes.
but for the purposes of the Doors movie, she's like, even the siren of of these New York vampires can't keep her arms away, can't keep herself away from Jim Morrison,
Yeah, and even Pamela finding them is just like, oh my God, like it's just the way it's done, in terms of like, oh hey babe, it's like,
yeah, he starts laughing really
yeah, it's just like,
cruelly.
I just feel like I've seen it
Right.
in so many films at a certain point. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's because, again, like you said, the artistry of the way it was shot and the projections on the walls and the
Amazing.
feeling of like losing control, with whether you're on hallucinogens or not, is really well done. But yeah, Andy Warhol's scene with the phone where he's like,
Edie got me this phone just so I could talk to God. He might have portrayed vacuousness in a way in his work, but he himself was not that, I don't think.
I agree.
That's not
Yeah.
how I understand him. And also, like, just in a sort of simplistic sense, like, between any of the Doors shows that are portrayed in the film and that party, where would you rather be? Like, what evening would you
Right.
rather spend? I would give a digit to spend a night at the factory around that.
Oh my God, absolutely. Although it's interesting, the later period stuff. So partway through, Val Kilmer goes method and he puts on weight, and it's the later period of the Doors. Did you respond as a kid to like LA Woman and some, Morrison Hotel and those later period things?
I always really liked the song Peace Frog. But I don't think I necessarily knew the difference when I first started listening, when I was, like whatever, 10 or 11 years old, when I started hearing the Doors. But as time went on, that stuff kind of became less interesting to me. Although Riders on the Storm is that's like certainly one of their best numbers. Like that's one of the best songs they ever did.
Absolutely.
I'm not crazy about LA Woman, the song. But I mean, it's good. I wouldn't say it isn't good. By that time, they also had a bass player, which is really useful.
Yeah. I stopped the movie at some point after he was doing his rants, and I went on to listen to like New Haven and Miami and things like that.
Yeah.
And God, he just really did go on and on and on.
Wasted and incoherent.
I thought they captured that pretty well.
Yeah.
The mania of like really having cops flank your concert facing outward, and the Doors being behind this thing. As much as I would have loved to have seen the factory, I also would have loved to have seen one of those late period shows where it was like, oh, something is going to kick off here.
Yeah.
It's weird. Like, who's going to go first? Like, is a cop going to react first, or is Morrison? I feel like I asked, but I don't know if I got the answer from you. How do you think Val Kilmer is in this film?
I mean, I'm trying to think of a performance in his career that could even hold a candle to this one. Like, I really like him as an actor. I didn't when I was a kid. Somehow I didn't like Real Genius when all of my friends did. So like I was slow to convert to Val Kilmer.
That's great. I love it.
But he is so good. He's completely invested. Like, I'm glad I didn't have to hang out with him on the sets. It sounds like it was kind of a nightmare. But I mean, the same could be said of Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman, and I really care for that performance or that movie.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But like, it's whatever he did, he really got it. Like the scene, and he's also doing. I think they did the thing where they blend the singing. Like
they did. If you see him,
sometimes.
Yeah, when you saw him with a mic, he was singing.
Mm-hmm.
And when they often would pull away, they would mix in Jim's stuff. So they would blend them. But, at first, you're kind of like, you're not so sure, like when they're first practicing and he doesn't sound very Jim Morrison-ish. But what's kind of cool about it as I realized that Val Kilmer did emulate him very well vocally, was that was a choice. Like
Right.
Jim Morrison had not found his voice. He hadn't found the shredding in his vocal cords. And
Yeah.
there's that scene at the beginning when you don't see Jim Morrison yet, but he's talking to the engineer, and it's later in his life, before he's died, and he's drinking and he's in the studio, but you can hear the weird, like, vocal thrashing of his throat. That weird thing that can only happen when you've lost your voice, where you don't have control over all of your vocal cords, and there's like weird pockets in there.
Yeah.
And I know that he did scenes over and over again, like the scene on the Sunset Strip, that they did 5 days of that to do that. But yeah, he's really incredible with what they've given him.
And for such a vain character, and who knows, a vain person, there's like, it's always considered a compliment to say there's no vanity in the performance, but like there is tons of vanity in the performance. It's the correct kind of vanity, like he is, like, he knows he's beautiful and he wields it, like, but him walking around with his shirt open and leather pants and arms outstretched, like, he really does have it. And then when like, it's to his credit, but not maybe the film's credit, that when he responds to things like getting busted for lying about his parents being dead, or certain other moments where he kind of is being treated kind of, when people are like calling him on his shit or whatever, his response is always like, don't say these things, like, don't, you shouldn't have done that. Like, he was very soft and like a little boy, because he really was that way, and he was full of shit in so many ways, but also he opened his mouth to sing, and basically like an entire industry was born from that, just from him looking how good he looked.
Absolutely.
And that's like, that is not something that people generally know how to respond to when it happens. Like, they become monstrous in a lot of ways. Not always, but it does happen.
Oh yeah, it's classic. I mean, a 22-year-old just catapulting and being one of the most recognizable faces in the world everywhere you go, and everybody wants you, and everybody thinks you're a genius, and everybody says yes.
Right.
Of course, with Jim Morrison, it's going to make the monster or whatever.
And also everybody's saying, why don't you ditch those losers? Like, you don't need to be in a band with those jazz dorks, like, you can do whatever you want. And
classic, the
ultimate.
Yeah.
But also he sort of, there's an element that there's that whole thing in the film of like, come on, we're a band, like, let's all be in it together. And they're like, I don't know, man. It seems kind of weird. Like the other guys are cast really well also, with, I think, one exception. I mean, Cal MacLachlan, he's one of my favorite actors anyway.
Oh, yeah, mine too.
For exactly the way that he sort of is the guy, but also is standing apart from it. Like, the way he does Ray Manzarek is so, I can see why Ray Manzarek wouldn't have liked it. But Ray Manzarek, despite having, produced some of my favorite records later on, like the X records that he made are like absolutely biblical for me, but like, he was a ridiculous figure in lots of ways, and he also spent a huge part of the rest of his life just like basically being a Jim Morrison, corpse fucker.
It's so weird. He just would not let up about Jim being a shaman and all this stuff. Patricia, in that documentary, says, Jim did not believe that there were dead people running around in his mind. But Ray Manzarek will totally lean into that,
Yeah. No shame. There's it's one of my favorite moments ever in popular culture. I can't remember. I think it was in an MTV piece that was around the time of the movie coming out, maybe shortly after. It's Ray Manzarek kind of leaning on a Jeep parked in the LA River, And he's kind of like, Jim was a poet. He dared to dance the shaman's dance. Like this shit, like, how can you say that? How can you possibly be saying that?
Yeah.
And but he did, but he said stuff like that forever. And I mean, to his ultimate advantage, maybe he just thought, well, if I keep saying this, they will keep reissuing the records and I will keep not having to work.
It's like Jim Morrison is a cashable figure, right?
Right.
And they lean into the pretension of the band.
Yeah.
They don't do it any service. I feel like this band could be loved and better understood if these things around it weren't treated with this like, oh my God, here he goes again. It's like they were a rock band.
Yeah.
They were a good rock band and they were unique.
Cool band in some way.
And no one ever leans into the music. It's always the message and the legend.
I think it's because if you do that too much, it winds up being like, people are strange. Well, I don't know about people are strange, but like Light My Fire and Touch Me and Love Me Two Times and all sort, like most of their big hits, Jim did not write and didn't write the words,
That's true.
And so if you start kind of, I think if you zoom in too much on that, it's tough. But like, I think that Frank Whaley as Robbie Krieger was great because he really is just like, I don't know, man. I just like did this thing.
That's a hard character to play because we don't know Robbie that well, right?
Right.
But I believed it. I
believed it.
Yeah. So I know where you're going, I think, with the casting now.
But if I were John Densmore, who I don't really know hardly anything about, really good drummer. I'm not like no shade in that department, but like Kevin Dillon as John Densmore is such a fucking narc, like weasel jerk and that's how Kevin Dillon always plays that guy, or he at least at that time, because he was that guy in Platoon. He's like, he tends to be that guy. For all I know, he's an amazing actor. I just know that in this movie, he's like, come on, man, we got a show to do, or like, my favorite is like, we took drugs to expand our minds, like that sort of, it's like scolding, such a parent, like, and such a, like the worst guy to be in a band with, even in a band with Jim Morrison.
But he was given that role. Like, that's the thing. Like, they're like, John's going to be
the cop.
Yeah. Right. All he does is like look disappointed while playing drums. Like, okay, here we go again.
Yeah.
And then being fed these lines.
Yeah. That's I guess ultimately got to be the fault of some of the dialogue that he's given. Although I could easily imagine some other actor playing that part. I mean, I guess he does look a bit like Densmore.
Who could play Densmore? It's our life's passion.
That's funny. But it has to be in 1990.
Depp wasn't that huge yet, was he?
No, not at all. I mean, he would have been an interesting choice for Jim Morrison, actually. I know he was running, but, Val Kilmer was the correct choice, I think. But yeah, around that time, I don't know. I keep thinking of like Robert Downey Jr., who would have been probably big to do that, or
Judd Nelson. Get Judd Nelson. I think Judd Nelson would be.
Nelson.
That's about right in terms of career and trajectory. It's like,
things have not gone well for him, but yeah.
Now it's like Stone is your chance to kind of get back into the language. You're with all these cool actors. So Judd Nelson.
I like Judd Nelson.
John Densmore.
Yeah.
All right.
I've also just never cared much for Kevin Dillon. There's one really big element that I think is it's like essential to the sort of the heart of the film, or the kind of the grandiosity of Oliver Stone sort of doing this sort of weird combination of art film and pure commercial endeavor, which is the guy, I think you referred to him, but the guy who is Death, who is a figure who recurs in the movie. I would have tried to count how many times he shows up in the movie. It's certainly more than 20 times. He's at the edges of every important sequence and most even non-important ones. He's in the very first outside of the studio. he's at the car crash with the Navajos who are bleeding to death on the side of the road. He's on Venice Beach. He's at the factory in drag. He's
Right.
at the Whiskey a Go Go. He's like everywhere at the edge of the frame. He's at the factory, and then 1 second later, he's like in a hansom cab with a top hat and stuff. And it's the bald man who is death, and he's shadowing Jim all through his life, and basically, about to usher him to the other side. And that guy he's a screenwriter and producer and collaborator with Oliver Stone. His name is Richard Rutowski. And I think that the choice of having him in there, the way he is in there so many times, is like in some ways it really is like the essence of the movie, both what is wrong with it and what is pure about it, like pure with no value judgments, but like it is the molten core of the movie is having some shit like that where the death is just at the edge of the frame at all times.
Oh yeah. Even dances with him at one point in that big outdoor bonfire thing. He's in the line, like just slightly behind him.
And there's a lot of they do a lot of work in the movie to force the word death into things. Like at one point he's like, I don't know what's in there. Maybe death. Like things like where it wouldn't even occur to anyone to ever say that.
Even Meg Ryan early on is like, does death turn you on?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is a normal conversation starter, when you're walking on the beach for the first time after somebody comes into your house and takes you out, into the night. It's normal.
I think we've all been asked that question. Precisely. Did you notice that right away?
I did. I didn't notice it right away. I started noticing it when they got to the factory and then the dance thing. Then I started putting it together. I did not know that he was in it so much, but it never bugged me. It never felt like, the stuff with the Navajo Indian coming, in and out of his life is a little bit like, heavy-handed. The death thing seems like a little more slight,
right.
I bet a lot of people just didn't ever put it together.
I wonder. I mean, I don't know how many people have seen the movie a million times, but
right.
It's just sort of like it's like a trademark on the film of like this being a director's vision of this sort of like ultimately kind of bullshit idealization of a guy who was ultimately like he had something, but like also was kind of a silly man. But like I like that more than I like the sort of weird, I don't know what the equivalent to Orientalism is for, like revering Native American culture in this particular way. It's not revering Native American culture. It's just sort of like shoplifting it really to make Jim seem more noble in some way. Because I don't know in what way, other than some of his dance moves, what his like in what way like Native and specifically Navajo, I think, ideology lives in him or is reflected in his work. But I do feel like the constant importing of like Floyd Red Crow Westerman ghosts, on the stage with him, it's just a little like, come on.
Of course Stone is going to lean into that. It's like candy for him.
Yeah.
It's like he's lived through the 60s. He's gone to Vietnam. He's expanded his mind with drugs. He's fallen in love with the Doors. Therefore, he's like, this is part of the story. Yeah. And oh my God, that's so exciting. Like, of course, we're going to start with a car wreck and Jim seeing it and living it. So I thought it was the part I did like in the film is when they start busting through the myths and they're like, your parents aren't dead.
Right.
Things like that. Like, I don't think a lot of people maybe going into this knew that part about it. They knew all the other stuff that had been fed to them by, Manzarek and writings about him and just, being a kid and sharing stories about like, oh, did you ever, you know this about Morrison? what was the book that was written about him?
No One Here Gets Out Alive.
Yeah, that was a totally big book, along with, Hammer of the Gods. And
Right.
so as a kid, you're reading all this stuff and taking it for face value.
Right.
It's like, it's total catnip for someone like Stone.
For sure.
He's like, thank you.
It's really funny to think of that time, which was a really long time, where Hammer of the Gods and No One Here Gets Out Alive were, first of all, books that everyone read, or had, like from junior high school on. I just like, they were just, but they were also sort of the only, unless you were really committed to spending your life looking up old, periodicals or something, this only really access you had to like information about rock bands was, books. I mean,
yeah, especially ones that were in the distance. It wasn't like reading Trouser Press about, Elvis Costello, like right now.
Yeah.
It's like these things were like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. It's like, oh, there were so many books, and it was the only way you could kind of cobble together this misinformation, about these things that existed, 15 years ago.
And in some ways, I think that those books are more, they're so interesting and they're really fun. They're really like, it's wild. But it's myth making.
Yeah. And this film is fun. I mean,
yeah, it is.
It is a popcorn movie. When it goes for it visually, it goes for it.
Yeah.
And, in terms of like having young actors in it and kind of a cool cast, it's all there.
Yeah. I would say it's a pretty decent drug movie, but really only for the first hour and a half. Then it's 2.5 hours long, or so.
That's amazing.
It's fucking long. It's quite long. But from a certain point onward, like really once he starts hanging out with Billy Idol and Michael Madsen and like entering that sort of Roadhouse Blues phase of his, when he gets a little fatter or whatever, that stuff is really unpleasant. I mean, some of it's good. There are good scenes or whatever, but it's a bummer. Like, I would not want to be super high when those bits came on. But the whole first hour and a half are really super fun and visually stimulating and whatever. And then it's just like the court case and the bad Thanksgiving and the like all this grim stuff. But then it ends in a really sort of light, like his redemption is that he stops being such a self-serious like piece of shit, like he just becomes kind of sweet, although he's also probably brain damaged, and the last line of the film is one of my favorite last lines really of any film ever, which is not spoiler alert, I guess, but which is let's go get some tacos. Pretty good.
That'd be so amazing to be like, you could just say that about any film. You'd be like, my favorite last line in 5 Easy Pieces is, let's go get some tacos. And a bunch of people who probably haven't seen it in a while will be like, oh, that's so funny. I never thought of that. But yeah, that's weird. Yeah, Fat City. Let's go get some tacos. Yeah.
It should be the last line of every film.
Battle of Algiers. I think even Erga Music War, I think it's the last thing the Police say after they're done playing their big concert in Paris.
Exactly.
So this has been amazing, Sean.
I agree. I'm so I've been waiting for this for 30 years.
Well, here's the deal. At the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the film we're talking about.
Okay.
So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many rides on the Snake to the Lake do you give this film? Do you give it 1 ride on the Snake to the Lake or 10 rides?
Based on that scale, specifically, I would give it 10. But that does not mean it's good. Like that's the thing. It's like rarely has a film been more fully realized than this one, and it is like it. Like I saw the Doors documentary that Tom DiCillo made. Really good, really well made. The guy's a great director, and he cuts through a lot of the bullshit that this movie is made out of.
Right.
But it's not fun in the way that this movie is fun. And so, in that sense, it's good. But, you know, if you're a Doors hater, you wouldn't even consider watching this movie.
Yeah.
But if you're like Doors agnostic or curious, like, what do people like? Why do people like the Doors? Like, what is it about these Doors? You couldn't ask for a better movie than this.
I agree. I think it needs to be seen because it's just also shows what filmmaking was like at a certain time. Like, this is a perfect showing of like big films that were happening then. Like, you know, make whatever you want. And exactly. And it flopped, and now go make JFK. Do what you want. You know, there was money. These things, even if they failed, it was still worth taking a chance on these big ideas. And I think it's an entertaining film with some amazing performances. And if you're a Doors hater, just get into the wigs of the film. The wigs in this thing are incredible. They're just like, there's a lot to have fun. There's a lot to pick apart if you're not enjoying it. But I think it's a really entertaining film. It's a popcorn film, really, about the Doors. Yeah.
And also, I mean, it's really interesting that this movie, you said it came out in March of 91.
Yes.
I saw it and it was really exciting and galvanizing. And then in August, or maybe probably early September of 91, I saw Slacker. And that was a movie that has really stuck with me in a much more profound way. Although this one has stuck with me, obviously. And, you know, I'm not saying there's only room for one of the... I like that both of those things could exist at that time. But, like, Slacker was life-altering. And the Doors movie was, like, the ending of a chapter of my consciousness in a funny way.
That is incredible. Well, thank you so much, Sean. It was so good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.